Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. As always, I'm excited to present our guest to you. But before I do, there are some people that I want to thank that we always thank. We want to thank brassandwinds.com, a Quinn the Eskimo company. When we're looking for brass and woodwind instruments, we always check with brassandwinds.com first. They've been terrific to us over the years, and we think they'll be terrific to you. Brassandwinds.com. If you're looking for the quickest way to learn the piano, check us out at Truer MU. We have a free course for you if you've never taken the piano before. And if you'd like to learn how to play jazz and blues very easily, we have something for you with our virtual courses. If you'd rather study with a person, we have Willow School and the Willow Music at the Willow School. And that can be found at willowschoolga.com. Willow School is a better way to learn music if you want to learn violin, or if you want to learn songwriting or brass or winds. Check us out at willowschoolga.com. And now I want to tell you a little story. I am at this point 52 years old. And so for many years, I was a composer, but I composed in the shadows, and no one heard my music except for me. And I thought this was the way it was going to be for the rest of my life. But then one day I got a strange email which invited me to join this group called Access Contemporary Music. I didn't know what it was, but I thought, what the heck, can't hurt. So I joined. And that opened up a whole world of possibilities for me as a composer. I was able to actually attend a performance of my music for the very first time. I'd never heard anyone playing my music since college. And I went up to Chicago and I met the director of Access Contemporary Music and spent a great day with him having a chat. And I learned all sorts of things about him. And he seemed to be interested in exactly the same things I was interested in. Except for one difference. He's the only person on the planet who makes me feel like I don't work hard enough. So I want to introduce him to you today. His name is Seth Boustead. Seth, welcome to our show.
Thanks so much, Adam. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
my pleasure to have you. I'm going to introduce you briefly, just tell people exactly who you are. You're a composer, a radio host, an arts manager, a writer, a concert producer. You do speaking, and you've described yourself as a visionary, and I would agree. So tell us, first of all, um, what is Access Contemporary Music? This is the thing you're most proud of.
Yeah, Access Contemporary Music is a nonprofit organization that I started while I was still in grad school with another person named Laura Copeltengis, although she kind of bowed out after the first year. And then, normally if you major in composition, the typical career path is you try to get a doctorate and go the academic route, which if you can do it, and it's getting harder and harder to do it as fewer universities hire, full-time professors. It's becoming really more adjunct. But if you can do it, it's a really nice life. But I wanted to kind of take a little leap of faith and try something different. So I thought, well, I wonder if I can do something with Access Contemporary Music. And like you're talking about being a composer, it is this kind of lonely thing because you write a lot of music and you don't know who will play it, and you reach out to people and you hope somebody will play it. And so I think in the early years we started a project called Weekly Readings, where I was saying I know a ton of great musicians in Chicago. We'd be willing to read through and record your music. And we were doing it every week. And so that really opened up everything for me because I really realized I started thinking about things not from the, through the filter through the lens of me as a composer, but, the wider community of people and just how much need there was out there. We got hundreds of pieces just from like one call on one listserv. And, so really ACM came from that. I just thought, my goodness, there are so many people. And the academic community has some ways. There are competitions, there are ways to get your music out, there are festivals and things, but it's almost never being heard by members of the general public. So it's what I often refer to as highly educated musicians playing very difficult music for other highly educated musicians. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I wanted to see if we could do something different. So from that kind of precept, helping composers, but also trying to take what we do out of a strictly academic environment and bring it to more people is really where everything has come from. And so, the Sound of Silent Film Festival, which you've written for a couple times, is one of the great ways we do that because people love film. And so they're modern silent films, and we ask composers to score them and play the music live. In recent years, we've done Chicago's only classical music street festival, which is just a fantastic way to present classical music, especially contemporary music, in a kind of approachable wrapper. I mean, people in Chicago, everybody knows the street festival because we have such a short summer that every weekend is packed with outdoor fun. And so we thought, well, we'll keep the brats, we'll keep the vendors, we'll keep the kid-friendly stuff, but instead of blues, we'll have classical music. And it's been surprisingly popular. And then, of course, we have a chain of storefront music schools where we teach creativity. And now we're launching a project that explores the intersection of music and architecture, which is kind of an outgrowth of what we've done with the Chicago Architecture Foundation, but more as a, with going into the venues and filming without audience. So we have time to really, really, really get some wonderful footage and to play the piece multiple times and record it in very high fidelity. So those are the main programs, but yeah, it really came from that idea of helping composers and then more and more trying to communicate to people that might go read a new novel or check out a new dance production or a new theatrical production, but didn't really realize, they never knew that they could go see a new classical music production and meet a living composer as well.
Well, you are a very good composer yourself. I've enjoyed your music very much, and you're steeped in music, and you speak so eloquently about it. And yet, I want to talk about your history. You would think that somebody like that would have been playing the piano at age 3 and would have been touted as a genius and taken all over the world. But I happen to know from your biography that you started in college as an anthropology major. Then you changed to music composition, but you dropped out and didn't get the degree. And that's just the beginning of the story. Let's talk a little, if you don't mind, about your biography. Before we get to the anthropology and college part, talk about you as a little kid. What kind of musician were you then?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm very open about the fact that I got into music late. I think that's really one of the reasons that I'm still so passionate about it. I've never taken it for granted, in that respect. I took piano lessons as a child, but I wasn't particularly engaged. I was always pretty good at it. I was never hailed as a genius by any means. But I mean, my teacher told my parents I had talent, and it was something that I was encouraged to pursue. But by the time I was 12, I just kind of lost interest, and I quit for a while. And then as a teenager, and I still, I've explained this sort of moment, and it was a moment that happened over time in many different ways, and as time goes on, you kind of forget exactly how it happened. But I heard classical music and really listened to it, and it was either our school marching band playing Dvorak, the famous New World Symphony, the first movement, which definitely happened, or it was hearing Beethoven's Seven performed live in Columbia, Missouri, or it was a mixture of all of those things. But I suddenly just got nuts about music. And so I spent my teen years really, trying to learn all those old pieces I had played as a child. I got out all my old sheet music, and we had moved to Missouri. My mother was caring for her father, who was ill, and so I was playing on her childhood piano at this point and really pushing myself. But it wasn't until college that I learned that you could actually be a composer, and that was really the watershed moment for me.
So you you started in anthropology because you didn't realize you had a choice. Is that what you're saying?
I was torn. I mean, I was not thinking of a career in music per se, and I was a very typical American in that, I mean, music to me was like singer-songwriters. I didn't really, I was moved by Beethoven and I wanted to play the piano, but I didn't know anybody who was doing classical music. I didn't know anybody who was composing. I was living in Jefferson City, Missouri. It just wasn't a thing. So it's more that I just didn't really know what to do with this. And so when I went to the University of Missouri, Columbia, I was taking piano lessons from the teacher, who was encouraging me to perhaps major in music. But I also had a lifelong love of other cultures. And a writer named Joseph Campbell was kind of pretty hot in the 80s. And I grew up reading that stuff. And so it was that, but ultimately it was Joseph Campbell and his whole follow your bliss thing that caused me to go back out of anthropology and into music. And then it was kind of getting away from my piano teacher, who was very focused on the classics and learning these scores perfectly, and starting to meet the composition guys and the people who were majoring in composition and those teachers. And just, it was such a different mindset. We weren't talking about fingerings and the perfect way to phrase a Beethoven sonata, which I was never going to be able to do anyway. We were talking about how awesome this piece was by so and so, and there were visiting composers coming through. And for me, it was just a massive breath of fresh air. I mean, it was exactly what I wanted. I wanted to be creative. I didn't want to try to reproduce these masterpieces from the past. I wanted to create music of my own.
And so here you are, all excited, and you've got a degree. And then you go to Chicago and have a conversation with a friend, and you say, forget that music degree thing. What the heck did you talk about in Chicago that made you drop your bliss like that?
I was still in music, but I went to Chicago and to help a friend move up here where I am right now. And we went to see an improv comedy show at a theater, very appropriately named The Annoyance, because a lot of their productions were kind of a jab in the eye. And it was an all improvised show, which improv comedy is still hot in Chicago, and there's still thousands of people daydreaming of getting onto SNL, but in the 90s, it was super hot. There was a show called Whose Line Is It Anyway on national television. I mean, it was hot. Chris Farley was around, and he was in Chicago. It was really, really a happening thing. And I talked to the piano player after the show that we saw, and very naively, he said, "Where's your sheet music?" And he said, No, I just make it all up. And I thought that was just, it really blew me away. I had no idea. And so I wound up bugging The Annoyance. I was always, not shy. And after a few months, they were like, "Gosh, shut up. All right, you can play a show. My God." And so I wound up playing there for about 3 years, give or take. And I started playing with my girlfriend at the time, who was a vocalist. And, at that time in Chicago, this little stretch of Clark Street, there were 3 improv theaters and 3 or 4 restaurants that had music. So, I mean, I was like 23, 24, 25, and I'm just walking up and down Clark Street, making a very precarious living as a musician. And, so my goals were a little mixed up. I'd kind of forgotten about composing, but I was so excited to be making a living in a major city as a musician that it felt like it was okay until it wasn't. Until I was like, okay, I'm in a rut. I'm just playing the same music. Even improvising, there's only so many scenes. There's only so many things that you can do. And I used to sneak into DePaul University to practice because I didn't have a piano. And I heard somebody playing the violin. It was late at night. And I was just like, I got to start composing again. I just remembered, I love that sound. I love violins. I love cellos. I love all these instruments I don't play, but that I spent time learning how to write for. And so, a couple weeks later, I went down to Roosevelt and Columbia College. I wound up going to Roosevelt for my master's degree.
Yes, you put in your bio that the thing that caused you to go for your master's was finding out that Stacey Garrop was going to be there. Tell us about why Stacey Garrop was so important to you.
The teacher I had before Stacey was Bob Lombardo, and he was important too, but he was retiring and he left. And I really was just trying to figure out, what am I doing here? Am I a composer? And if I am a composer, what does it mean? That's a really big question that I think any creative person should ask themselves. For whom am I writing? What am I doing? If I'm playing piano in a restaurant, I know exactly what I'm doing, right? I'm entertaining people for a couple of hours while they eat. Nothing wrong with that. It makes people very happy, and that's always a good thing to do. But with this other thing, it was more amorphous. And so, Stacey came in, and I think she was a lot more career-focused as a composer than I am. But nonetheless, she was this breath of fresh air. She took me seriously. I showed her my piano music, and I'd already made a piano CD, which she thought was impressive as a student. So she was, really took me seriously, encouraged me to be creative. She had a lot of ideas I didn't wind up taking, like becoming a doctor and doing the academic thing and trying to win the Rome Prize, which would have been, amazing. But nonetheless, it did reinvigorate me in a lot of ways where I thought, okay, this is a real thing. You can be a composer. And she taught me how to be less shy about asking people to play my music. At Roosevelt, you had to find your own performers. So all the composers would go to the orchestra rehearsals, and we would just walk down the aisle talking to violinist after violinist, will you play my piece? And they'd be like, I don't play new music. I hate new music. I hate new music. I hate new music. You'd just be rejected. And finally, it was funny. I didn't know how an orchestra worked, the hierarchy. This is a really funny story in a way because I go all the way down. I finally get all the way to the left side, which anybody who knows an orchestra will know that that's the concertmaster. And he says yes. It was this Japanese guy, an incredible violinist who played my music for several years. We've kind of lost
Wow.
touch with each other. But I hope that's a story for people that, yeah, I mean, the person who said yes was arguably the best in the orchestra.
Right. Let's be sure our audience that isn't as familiar with the orchestra understands the concertmaster sits closest to the conductor. It's the violinist who's really going to give every piece of information to the rest of the string section that they're going to do. They're the second in command in the orchestra, essentially. And that's who you wound up getting a yes from through process of elimination.
Yeah, yeah, it's this guy Kazuhiro, and he played my stuff. I still have recordings of him playing my music. I mean, so really incredible that worked out. But I mean, again, that came from Stacy because she's like, go to that orchestra rehearsal. I said, oh, they turned me down. She says, so what? They're going to turn you down. You are going to get rejected thousands of times in your life as a composer. You need to just forget it. So there was some career advice I didn't take, and then there was that kind of just pick yourself up. You're a composer. By definition, you're putting yourself out there. You've got to toughen up.
Yeah.
And that was great advice.
That is great advice. As a matter of fact, as a creative person in general, I can't think of better advice. You've got to be your own advocate, and that can be very difficult. Can you offer any advice to our audience as far as creative? Can you expand on that message of being your own advocate for us?
Sure. I think, I mean, because the flip side of that is that there are a lot of composers. I get contacted all the time. I mean, with people that want us to play their music. And that's great. You should absolutely do that. But my advice is, as you're being your own advocate, you should take a little time and look at the mission of the people you're reaching out to and see how you fit what they do. So when somebody writes me and says, hey, I would really like ACM to play my piece, or I would really like for you to put me on Relevant Tones, which is my former radio show, now podcast, I think, okay, sure. But if they write and they say, hey, I see that Relevant Tones' mission is, to do this, and you've done themed shows, and I'm doing this thing, and I think it would fit in this way, and I think your listeners would like it for this reason, like that's going to connect with me. That's going to make sense, because that person's done a little bit of homework. They've actually, done some homework. So I think it's the same thing if you're writing a grant or if you're submitting your music to a competition. You really need to take a second and do the best job you can. Make your score look as good as it can, all of that. But then take a second and go, who are these people? What are they looking for? Do I really fit? Sometimes you send your music to a place where it was never going to get selected. And maybe that's an okay experience to get used to being rejected. But, as you're advocating for your own self as an artist, you also have to put yourself in the place of the curators, the presenters, the performers, the people who are going to make it real and say, why would they choose me over the 4,000 other people that are coming through the door?
That day.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's that
And
day.
that has helped me a lot. I mean, I've gotten so much more out of that. Like when I moved to New York a few years ago, I started going to all these concerts by the Composers Concordance and just gradually getting to meet everybody, and I got to know the organization really well. And then finally, they had a planning meeting that they invited me to, and they were planning their season, and there was a concert that had a theme that fit a piece of mine, and I was like, I've got a piece for this, raise my hand, but I waited all that time until I knew I had something that they were looking for, and now they play my music all the time. I mean, so that's the best advice I can give. Don't give up. Everybody's going to tell you that. It's true. But also don't bang your head against the wall needlessly. I mean, look around, see what fits what you're doing, get to know them first, and then make a pitch that they can't refuse, that they can't turn down because, it fits what they're trying to do. It fits their mission.
So that's great. Thank you very much. I love that advice. Let's continue with the story about ACM. You've got your master's degree. And here it is. You've talked about Chicago being there's a golden age in Chicago of music in the early 2000s. And isn't that about when you created ACM?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've done your homework. I'm just kind of impressed. That's great. I have talked about it. Most recently, I wrote an article for New City Magazine in Chicago a couple months ago about just kind of reflecting because they're asking me to write about music during COVID, and there's just not much going on. So I was like, can I just do like a nostalgia piece? But yeah, when we were forming, we were doing some stuff under the name in 2000 up to 2004, but I finished my master's degree in 2002, and then it was 2004 that we incorporated, that things really started getting started. And that was when the Chicago Cultural Center was, and this is my opinion, other people may say they think it's in its golden era now. But for classical music, they had more programs at that time than they've ever had since. And there were a lot of opportunities. And what I wrote in that New City Magazine article piece was, if you could play, write, or produce, you had a really good shot at working with the city at that time and getting paid for it. And you know, I was lucky enough that I could do all three. So we were performing there on their Sunday Salon concert. And then, you know, we were doing like open rehearsals in Pritzker Pavilion, which is this Frank Gehry band shell in the Millennium Park. I mean, just a really sensational venue. And so, you know, my experience with running an ACM was actually the first few years up to about the financial crash in 2009 were actually very easy. You know, and it made me a little bit arrogant. You know, I was like, oh, everybody complains about running a nonprofit. This is so easy. You know, well, that's because I came of age in a flush time, right? I mean, there was money from the Illinois Arts Council. There was money around, and we were traveling. We went to Paris. We went to Mexico City. I mean, I went to China. I made a documentary in 2006 about a Chinese composer that was aired on PBS. I mean, it was just, you know, it was that kind of time. And then the financial crash happened and just everything changed. But, you know, that's actually arguably when I had to work and actually like learn how to run an organization, because it's easy to do something when things are easy, needless to say.
So what did you learn? Is that where you started to really get the ideas that you were just communicating to us and understand about the appropriateness of understanding the needs of the people you're talking to?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. You know, so we're getting money from the government, the state arts council. We're getting money from a couple of private foundations. Well, the arts council got completely gutted. I mean, their budget was slashed by like 80%. You know, so that's gone. Their travel fund is gone. There's no more jaunting off to Mexico. You know, the corporate places like Boeing and United that were giving us money to go to China, they were no longer giving money. The family foundations are saying, well, you know, we give based on our portfolio, you know, the dividends on the stock market. Well, those are gone, so there's nothing to give you. We just have to sit on our pile of money until it comes back. So we had gotten a space on Wilson. You've been there, and we, you know, I had the piano in the back. And so I moved the piano to the front, and I started teaching in the window. And this is really where the ACM School of Music starts to get going. I mean, we've been doing some teaching there, always in the back, but I started making it much more visible, and it fit our mission of accessibility anyway. So I was teaching there, and then, you know, definitely at that time, while some people were struggling, others were not, much like the last year. And there were people that wanted lessons, and that neighborhood was changing. We got very lucky that, you know, Ravenswood back then was just Ravenswood, and now it's Ravenswood. You know, I mean, the street Ravenswood itself was mostly empty warehouses because it was a former industrial corridor, and most of those have been filled now with breweries, and there's a whiskey distillery, and there's, you know, all kinds of kind of artsy, funky, cool things there. You know, there's a Michelin award-winning restaurant now on Ravenswood where like, you know, they used to make furniture and stuff. So we got lucky in that regard, that the neighborhood itself kind of started to change. But the school really grew, and then I hired teachers, and we started to really have this, you know, existential discussion of why does ACM have a school? You know, it's great that this earned revenue is helping us through a very difficult time, but what do we do? How does it serve our mission? So to this day, we make sure that all of our students are composing, or at least learning theory. And we're about to, in May, we have our Molto Tutti film festival, we call it, where the students they compose, perform, and record a piece of music all themselves, and then they create a video for it. So these kids are like little auteurs, you know, and then we screen the films, usually in a theater. This year it's going to be outdoors somewhere, and that's, you know, so the school really grew, and that was where I had to, you know, that really changed ACM in so many respects, because we added this enormous educational component that we hadn't had before. And that was definitely an example of, like you said, I mean, that's what the community wanted at that time. That's where we went. And I went from thinking that this school was an add-on to realizing that it is an absolutely integral part of our mission, because, you know, a lot of the people who come to our concerts knew us through the school first. And, you know, when somebody comes week after week for a lesson, you have a chance to spend real quality time with them When they come to a concert, it's fantastic, but it's a more ephemeral experience. You may or may not see them again. They may say, oh, that was some weird music, and never think about contemporary music again. But, we were just talking to a woman about this as we were conducting these interviews. She's like, I never really thought much about contemporary music, but now my daughter is composing in your school. And I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Ah.
We got you. Your kid is composing. And that's, that is now you're talking about a lifetime connection now, not just you came into a concert, had a beer, and took off. I mean, so the school is really, and we just actually remodeled that school on Wilson during COVID. So it now even has a little coffee bar that is basically, if we sell coffee, that's awesome. That's not the point. What it is a giant welcome sign. We're trying to say, we want you to come in and find out more about us. And it's working. We've been open 2 weeks. And people are coming in and asking us about the street festival. Are you guys doing the film fest this year? And it's awesome for me because I'm learning what members of the community know about ACM. And it's just, really gratifying to know that after 14 years with the music school and 20 some odd with the organization as a whole, that people do know us.
Yeah, while you were talking, I'm thinking, okay, so he's making money on his music school, and he's asking, how does that serve the mission? Why would you do that if it's making money? It's serving the mission. You're surviving, and you can spend that money on your ACM. But you've been very smart here. You've actually, by asking that question, you've not only ensured the survival of the school, you've furthered your own goals as a composer and mine as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I'm very proud of that, that after all these years, even with the coffee shop, like we're offering this special now where if you spend at least $5, you can practice piano for free. Like everything serves our mission. We think about it constantly. It's like an obsession. It's like the school has to serve the mission. Everything has to serve the mission. And again, going back to that very beginning thing I was talking about, where it needs to help other composers as well as get their music out to the general public. I mean, that's really important for us that we're working to where we're actually, now increasingly as we grow, paying composers for everything. And that I'm really proud of that too. So we can pay people for their work as we move forward, and but provide opportunities for composers of all kinds, not only to write, but to hear it actually performed by the thankfully for us, we have a wonderful stable of musicians we work with. And so that's always, I hope, I mean, that's why we're a nonprofit, so that, the idea is that it's so baked into the organization that even after I'm gone, it just kind of continues. It's the corporate culture or whatever you call it, that no matter what we do, yeah, we might have a bake sale. We have to do things to make money, but that bake sale better serve the mission also, not just bring in money. That's a really important thing for us.
And also good for any of our entrepreneurs in the audience, people who have a music school or are thinking of going into the arts. Just this, that it's not all about you and furthering your goals. You're thinking always of, what are you trying to accomplish, and how can everything you do serve that goal? It's any business person is going to tell you that's sound advice, but people in the arts don't always think like that.
Yeah, that's a frustration for me. I mean, there's this idea sometime in the arts that if you monetize your product or even think of your music as a product, that it somehow compromises it. And I always say, listen, when I'm composing the music, I'm not thinking of it as a product. It's artistic. I'm thinking of the music. But when the piece is finished, I mean, I want to get it out, and so how do you quote unquote sell the piece? I mean, that's really important. That's one thing, that art is a product, whether you want to think of it that way or not. Certainly other people are thinking of it that way. And then the second is, I mean, I think even for a for-profit company, I mean, if your reason to exist is only to maximize benefit for your shareholders, that's not great. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's not. There always has to be a reason for being, for everything, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. And if there isn't, it's not going to last, in my opinion. I mean, there needs to be some value proposition that isn't just money. We need money to do the things that we do, but what we really need is to feel alive and feel like humans, and have a connection with somebody, and that comes through the arts, but it should come through everything. I mean, I really firmly believe that even if you're a for-profit company, or a person that wants to, you want to write commercial music, fantastic. It still has to have a mission, though.
It seems like one of the things I was wondering as I was researching you is how you balance your life between this we, and me. Being a composer is a solitary activity at first. If you're a classical composer, if you're writing scores, you're very, you're isolated. You're thinking about your community, but you're the one making all the decisions. It's not, and so how do you, I was thinking about how you might transition from that me to we back and forth safely, but it sounds like you're answering the question already. As you're working, you're thinking about how it fits into your community and that nurtures you as a person. Am I accurate here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, composing, I was just talking about this with somebody earlier today. I mean, the classic model in the Western hemisphere of the world is, still this kind of 19th century great man theory or whatever you want to call it,
Right.
and that unfortunately is still around, where if you're a painter or you're a composer or a playwright, you want to be the great artist, and you get treated as such, and your vision is this, genius vision, etc. And I struggle with that. I mean, because my friends who are in bands, I mean, they create all their pieces collaboratively,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk about how deeply satisfying it is. The bass player comes in with a bass line, and then they lay down a guitar riff over the top of it. Somebody writes some lyrics, and I think that's true. And as I've worked more collaboratively with the musicians that I'm fortunate enough to work with, I do find that it is true. And that's not to say, I wrote my piano concerto, and it's essentially a musical self-portrait. So that's a very intimate thing where I am definitely thinking me. These are my experiences that I'm putting into music, and I'm going to be, with the orchestra. The trumpet player is like, "Can I do this?" It's like, no, you know. But I think that both aspects of it are very vital to music making. And it is always fascinating, as you know, when musicians play your music. I was just in a rehearsal the other day, and they're saying, like, well, can I play it this way? What about this articulation? Do you like this? Do you like that? And I mean, that is, they're having input, but at the same time, they're asking me as the ultimate arbiter and authority over this piece. So in that case, it's almost both, right? you know.
Yeah.
But with ACM, it's very much we. With composing, it's mostly me with some we, if that makes sense.
It does. No, absolutely. And I am a jazz and a rock musician as well, and have written songs and produced them. And I understand that collaborative. And you're right; it is very gratifying. In
hmm
fact, the music is better when you can collaborate with people.
hmm
Um, so, tell me, how would you say that at this point, looking back, you've gone through two disasters, housing, I mean, financial disaster, COVID. You've had highs and lows, ups and downs, golden ages. How have you succeeded, and where do you feel like you've fallen short so far?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the mission of ACM at one time, and I went through this thing that shortly after the housing market crash, Goldman Sachs did this, like, oh gosh, we're real sorry that we partly caused this, and so they launched a program called 10,000 Small Businesses, and I actually went through it, and luckily they outsourced it, because the one time a guy from Goldman came in, he was a real jerk, and I'm just going to say that because I don't think it'll surprise anybody. But they outsourced it to the city colleges of Chicago, and these guys were smart, and it was essentially an MBA program. And they were really asking you to refine your mission and vision. What does the world look like if your organization is successful? And I said, and I still kind of think it, the American Cancer Association wants to cure cancer. That's an enormous, multi-lifetime, goal. And I said, well, I want every man, woman, and child on the planet to know that contemporary music exists, And they're like, well, that's not reasonable. I'm like, well, I don't want a reasonable mission, So obviously I've fallen short in that area, right?
Right.
I mean, and it is frustrating over the years to have had to have reinvented ourselves so many times in some respects. I mean, we've bumped around. When the Cultural Center stopped having so much live music, we moved to another venue, and then they started charging us something that was not appropriate, so we were out of there, and we were down at the University of Chicago, and that was not very good. So then we were back up in Ravenswood, and then we were finally getting to where we were averaging about 100 people to a concert, and these were on Monday nights, so that's a really good number for a Monday night. And then COVID shut it all down. And
Ugh.
so sometimes I do just think, like, I really wonder what would it actually take to have, a consistent stable of people who come to all the things we do, or like 70%, whether it's virtual or not. I sometimes feel like each event is its own siloed off realm. Sound to Sound Film gets some of the film geeks. Thirsty Ears just brings in people because it's outdoors and it's fun. And then the concerts, if they're themed, sometimes it's just people who like the theme. And I just, what I really want is to say, we have a brand, you trust the brand. You don't know what we're going to do, but you know that we're going to put our heart into it and it's going to be sincere. So, you don't understand this music maybe, but we're going to explain it to you. And now we're kind of playing around with, when Relevant Tones was a radio show, we did a lot of live broadcasts with music. And that was fun because I could curate it live and I could talk to the composers live. And we're actually thinking, now that everybody's so digital media savvy, what if we're not doing concerts anymore per se, we're doing live podcast tapings. And that gives us a chance because as a lifelong musician, it really is only now finally hitting me. Another place where I've come up short is just how much you have to kind of explain what's happening to people who aren't in music. How much I've taken for granted that they understand, going back to like that concert master thing. And so I really think that having someone, whether it's myself or someone else, who is there in real time curating and asking people not only what was your inspiration for this, but also like, well, how did you bring that to life musically? Show me. And the violinist says, well, it's this, digga, 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 digga. And then when you hear that in the piece, you go, oh yeah, that's that part. I know that part. Because it's really hitting me that you have to give people lots and lots of inroads into the music. And think of like a podcast like Song Exploder, where they just take one song and break it down. Can we do that for classical music? Because it's the kind of thing that I wasn't always so interested in. I'm happy to talk with you after the concert, but now I'm like, no, it needs to be in the concert. So I think that's one way we came up short, and maybe that's what explains the other shortcoming, which is just, I thought we'd have a larger reach by now after all these years. And we do. I mean, when you talk about the light end of the reach, people who have taken a lesson, people who know ACM exists, but I'm talking like hardcore people who come to a lot of stuff. I was thinking it'd be thousands of people by now, not hundreds.
Yeah, sure. Well, knowing what you know about the realities of the world, and you and Dalcroze and everybody else who ever tried to have a vision knows that things happen over decades and things change. What's your vision from here? Is it going to continue to be as ambitious, or are you going to try to be more flexible? What do you want in 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, in 20 years, I will have, in 10 years, I think I will have created a succession plan for myself, so, and not because like I have to get out, it's so horrible. No, I just mean that, it is meant to last. I'm hoping, the plan with ACM is that we're building an institution, so that's a big part of 20, being 49 right now. I look at 20 years and I go, yeah, I'm not going to be the executive director in 20 years. So I want to make sure we're in super great shape. We've got cash reserves, we've got a strategic plan, and we can hand it over to somebody who's going to do a great job with that, probably, in 10 to 15 years. We're like everybody looking into the possibility of digital media content. Like everybody, we're looking at the social justice movement and saying, have we been truly as accessible as we would like to be? Are we meant to be providing piano lessons for wealthy, mostly white people in Ravenswood? I mean, we also serve Avondale, which is a neighborhood in Chicago that's more Latino. We serve a neighborhood called Rogers Park that is also a kind of typically underserved neighborhood. But I'm wondering what more we can do, especially if we're creating digital content that exists. I mean, I've already paid for it, and now it's out there. I need X number of people to say that they support it. They're stakeholders. They're going to buy a ticket. But then after that, I mean, can I inspire anybody with this content? We're asking ourselves these kinds of big questions now. We're even asking big questions like, I mean, could we move to a pay-what-you-can model across the board with lessons, with classes, with everything? How could we inspire a kid? I mean, I grew up more or less poor in Missouri, and my parents divorced when I was pretty young. So I had a single mother for most of it. But nonetheless, just being where I was, I was definitely going to encounter music making, and some of it at a fairly high level. That's not the case for everybody. And, how could you be so accessible that anybody could think to themselves, I might be a professional cellist, I might be a professional composer, I might be a professional horn player, what have you. Just to see that model. That's something we're really thinking about now as we, and it took a long time to really untether ourselves from the academic model because, I mean, I went to school for so long and it was such a warm, nurturing, comfortable environment, but we're finally growing big enough that we can kind of say, what if, the kids in the Multitudi who are composing and doing all this stuff, having these wonderful opportunities, what if they're kids from everywhere? I mean, regardless of their background. And I don't have the answer to that question yet. We're just now starting to ask these questions, like everybody, as our world was turned upside down over the last year or so. and we're saying, the stuff we're doing is super cool, but we need to broaden who we're reaching, who's doing it. So I think that's the number one thing is we're going to continue. I mean, I can go on and on about, we're pivoting to digital and pivoting to this and, different models. But I think what's the most important thing that we're looking at right now is accessibility. How can we truly, truly inspire people? And if they say, I'm inspired, I'm turned on, I want to do this, well, how can we get you a cello? How can we get you lessons? How can we do what we say we want to do in every aspect of it?
Well, if we're going to talk about accessibility, let's start with letting the people who are watching this video know how they can find you.
Yeah, the website is acmusic.org. Our podcast is Relevant Tones. That's relevanttones.com. And our Sound of Silent Film Festival, the virtual presentation, will be May 7th and May 8th. That's a pay what you can model. It's going to be wonderful. It's a great program this year. I was nervous we were only going to get COVID films, but we got a very nice, well-balanced set of films for people with some great scores.
Well, Seth Boustead, thank you for what you've done for me personally, and thank you for your vision and for speaking so clearly for folks to understand what it is you're trying to do so that we can all perhaps get in there and help you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me tonight.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I appreciate you having me here.
My pleasure. Folks, if you want to know more about what Seth's doing or you want to reach him personally and you can't find him, you can contact me at adam@willowschoolga.com. I would be happy to tell you more. Of course, we have other videos for you to check out, other notable folks who've talked equally what's the word, equally well good word, Adam, equally well about music and the arts, and we want you to check those videos out. Please like them. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check us out at truermu.com and willowschoolga.com. Thank you everyone very much for joining us for this interview, and we'll see you next time.